Hi guys, and welcome to the new episode of our weekly webinar. I will share my screen and give you a brief introduction. Yeah, so this is already the third edition of this event that we are having every Wednesday. The first two were more private. We did them to learn, to experiment, to see how the community receives it. Because this event, it's a community event. And our plan is to bring here the community, but also bring in the team. So we have everyone in the same place to discuss interesting topics coming in Plant and App, interesting features, but also like we are going to do today, build something from scratch, see the process of building apps and how we can use the features to achieve that. But we can also discuss product roadmap. We can discuss what's new in Plant and App, and actually that's what we've been doing last week. We went over the new features in Plant and App 1.6. The webinars are recorded and they are published on our YouTube channel. So I will post this link here so you can see past editions as well. I'll post it in the chat window. So the edition today will also be available probably tomorrow on our YouTube channel. And of course, this is, we are doing this event, a technical event for the community. So every suggestion is welcome. Also, we accept guest speakers if you want to present like your cool system that you built or a concept that you are working on that you think the community will benefit from. We appreciate that. And in fact, you'll receive a short survey after the webinar, and that would really help us plan the next editions and the content around next editions. But most important at all is that you feel you are getting value from this event and you attend regularly. I think it's a great step forward to create that synergy between our team and the community. Okay, so the plan for today is actually to build an application from scratch. And we are going to build a project management and billing solution, something simple. We'll see actually how far we can go in 1 hour. I'm hoping that the demo gods will be on our side today and nothing will break. So I think without further ado, we are ready to start. And I also have the team in this call, and actually I have some sidekicks, so if I get stuck, somebody from my team will help me, I'm hoping. So let's get started. So what I have here, it's a simple, blank Plant and App application. I don't have anything yet. So we'll start building, but before that, let's look a bit at what we want to achieve, the specification. So, I mean, when it comes to project management, there's a lot of features and a lot of different ways to structure it that you can think of. But for this example, I thought let's build something simple, minimal, just have a list of customers and be able to bill hours. So create task and then record the time for each task and then generate an invoice with the total amount of hours. And of course, if we get there fast, we can take suggestions from the chat window or the QA section to do additional changes. Okay, so we start by going to the configuration screen where we have all the application building features. And we know, we have to start with the data, right, before we do everything. So on the entity screen, we see all the entities that are built in, but we need to create our own to hold the data that we'll operate with. So we know we need a list of customers. So let's create a customers entity. And of course, it has a name. We'll probably need an email, so we know where to send the invoice. What else? We were discussing here in the specification that maybe we have separate billing per customer. So then maybe we need to know per customer their hourly rate. And notice here how I changed the types. So I did it for email as well, and I will do it for the money. And you'll see how this putting the right type ties to everything that we generate. So when I use money, all the grids, the forms, all the views will display this the value for this property formatted as money. Okay, so let's see if we need everything else. Maybe we need an address, and I think that's it for now. Just maybe the billing address just to display it on invoices. We don't need it for anything else. We choose the display property to be the name. So that will be displayed in short form. Now we are ready to save. Of course, there's also the permissions part, but since for the scope, especially for this initial small scope, I don't want to go into the permission scheme and create various roles in the application, like the customer role and maybe the employee role and the project management role. That would complicate things for the purpose of building this app right now. So it will be mostly for internal employees to track their hours and bill them to the customer. So now I'm ready to save. You see the entity appears in the list, and we can go to back to the application, to the front side of it. And you'll notice that we have the customer page where it's already pre-configured. Just 1 second, it loaded. So it's already pre-configured to show me the forms, to add data, and the grid to display data. So let's add a couple of customers. So we have them here. And then maybe I will use my email address. So in case we get to send emails, I can check them. So maybe we charge this customer $100 per hour. And this customer is on, let's say, Main Street, New York. Okay, let's add a second customer just to have enough data. Let's call this one Food Inc. I'll put the same address. And let's charge this customer $200 per hour. They can afford it. So now that we have our database of customers, we need to be able to create tasks for this customer, right? So let's move back to the entity screen and create another entity for tasks. And then under properties, maybe we need a title for the task. And then let's look again at the specification. We will need to record time, but the way that we are going to do it, it will not be a time per task, but we record multiple start-stop buttons. So then you could start a task, work half an hour on it, stop it, come back later, record another half an hour, and so on. So then really, maybe it's just title for now, but the task need to belong to a customer always. So then we need to create a customer property. And here in the types dropdown, we need to link it to a customer. So we can choose under entities, our customer entity that we just created. So what it does, in fact, it creates a foreign key in the table because this entity are real database tables. And they also can be queried directly, which I think we'll get to in this demo. Again, a title property, and that's it for now. And we can make the customer required. We cannot create orphan tasks. Okay, so we can see the new task here. And also if we switch to the dependency view, we can see that the customer has a list of tasks and we can see the relationship between the data as it builds up. So now if we go back to the main application screen, here you see we have a new page for tasks. And now we are able to add the task, right? So let's say upgrade Windows Server for this customer. Yeah. So now we have the task list. Of course, I forgot to add a property, the status of the task. So now to create a status, of course, we could create a new property that is just text and type this status. But in fact, maybe it should be a dropdown. So in that case, we need to create a new entity. Let's call it task status. Give it a plural name. And then just name should be enough. Because the other properties like an ID, I already have generated by the system. Make this primary and save. So now we can go back, and for task we can create a new property called status, which we know to be a task status type. We could make it required, but at this stage it will make a conflict because we already have a record there, so I will leave it optional for now. So now task also has a status and I can edit it. And of course, I don't have any statuses yet. So let's define a couple of statuses. Let's create one new. Let's create one in progress. And let's create one done. So now edit it, and I have the statuses here for the task. Cool. So so far, I mean, we did the crude stuff. We have a simple project management software. Of course, it's not better than any spreadsheet that you already have. It will get better when we start creating the business logic. So next thing, let's add the stop button and start recording the time we spend working on the task. So now we get more into the business logic of the application. So let's see how we do that. There are, of course, in Plant and App, there are many ways to do everything. The way that I will do it is I will add a stop button here, of course. And I will create a new entity. I will call it maybe time tracking, where every time you stop, I create a new record and associate it with a given task. So at the end, I can do the sum of all the time tracking and say that is the total amount of time that I spent on that task. Okay, so let's get rolling. So first thing, as always, we start with the data structure. We need somewhere to hold this data. So let's create a new entity. Let's call it time tracking. And then under properties, let's hold a task ID. So we create an object of type task. And then we will need to hold the duration. And now it depends, maybe we want to round it up to 1 hour, always, even if a few minutes, round it up to an hour. Of course, it can be maybe 5 minutes, 15 minutes increment, it's what people usually use. But for sake of simplicity, let's do it 1 hour. It will simplify calculations. So number of hours is what we need to save, and it will be a number field. Okay, so I still have to choose a display column, and I will use hours. It's not necessarily intuitive in this case. But in a future version, we'll make it possible to use different display name. I mean, in this case, I wanted to use the task as the display property for the time tracking, but we'll not see it anywhere in our example, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so now that I have the time tracking, I can go to the task and tell it that it tracks time. And we do that by specifying this time a list of entities, because we know one task can have multiple trackings. So I started working now, then I start maybe tomorrow, I continue doing something else. So then I create a list of time tracking. And this again creates a foreign key between the two tables. Okay, so now if I go back to the application, you'll see that it also generated the time tracking page for me, but normally I wouldn't use this directly. I mean, I could go here and say this task took this amount of minutes, but normally I will do it through task, through the start stop buttons, not do it from here manually. So in that case, I can even go and hide this page, you know? And in that case, what happens is that it disappears from the menu. I can still see the time tracking per task if I go to the task page and look at its detail page, right? So on the detail page, you'll see all the fields related to a task, but also all the relationship that it has. So I can still manually create time from here, manually record time entries. Okay, so now we have the data structure. Let's move towards implementing the business logic around this. So we jump to the workflow screens. So we create our first workflow that we'll use to do all the steps required when we start or stop a task. So the first thing, maybe we should define the input parameters, what goes in the workflow. And I would say that we need a task because everything will be related to a task. And again, you see you have types for all the input parameters, and you can also make it entity types. So we know we receive a task into this process. And then the first thing is we need to create a time recording for it. And actually, if we think about it, maybe we should create a time recording when you click stop, although we need to record the start time somewhere. So maybe the data structure is not entirely correct. What I would do is maybe hold per time tracking, also hold the start time. So then I can, I know when you hit stop, I know from where to calculate. So let's make this date and time. And I think this should be required in any case. Task should be as well. And in fact, hours is the one that shouldn't be required. But I will start it with 0 and increment it. So I don't have to change all the logic so far. Okay, so now I have the start date. So when I click the start button, I will create a time tracking with the current time, and I will set the total hours to 0 for now. And that's it. Let's do it. So we add an action for every entity created in Plant and App. You have actions to do the crude stuff with it. So in our case, we know we want to create a new time tracking. So I add one of these actions. And you'll see here, it asks me for the entity properties. For task, expects a task ID. And I already have one because I sent it as a input parameter. So I pass task ID. So this is the name of the input parameter, and this is the property of the task. Hours, we know it's going to be 0. And the datetime, we can use one of the system tokens that is called datetime now. Okay, save. And at the minimum, this is it. I will come back later and extend it for everything. So let's call this start tracking time. Okay. The workflows, the business logic, give me a second. Oh, I didn't add it again after I went back. So I need to add the task parameter. Task, okay. So now I can test it from here, the business logic. If I pass 1, oh, it needs to be the datetime. The datetime needs to be in ISO format. So I will ask help from Rado. Do you have a suggestion how I can do this quick?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so I created a new time tracking, and I'm passing the datetime now token.
Okay.
But the system expects it in the ISO format.
This is something we added recently. Maybe maybe you can do run SQL query before this action, where we can bring the date in the ISO format.
Okay. So maybe what I will do for now, maybe you can log in and help me with this.
Okay.
Maybe what we'll do for now is just hard code this so I can move on. And in the meanwhile, if you can help me figure it out.
Okay, sure.
So let's say we create this, maybe I'll create it tomorrow to make sure there are always some hours in the day. So then I will put it like this. Like this, I think. Let's see if this works. Unsupported datetime kind of unspecified. Okay. Okay, I will leave Radu to figure this out, and then in the meanwhile, I will move on to create the button and link it to the workflow. Okay, so now I go back to the front end. And here on the tasks window, I will add the start button. So I can go to customize listing. And here I can configure in detail how the listing would look like. Like I can go in every field, change some of these settings, you know, so it's very, very granular in terms of what you can configure about the listing. In my case, I just want to add a new button, so I will add it here. And note that there are two types of button, item buttons and grid buttons. Item buttons are per row, so they are per each individual task. The grid buttons, they are not connected to a row. You can do bulk operations or unrelated operations like adding a new entry. It's not tied yet to anything. So we do the start button here. Again, I can specify various settings. I will not go through them. And instead, I would add the action. And here, for every workflow that Plant and App you create in Plant and App, there will be an action that allows you to execute it, right? So here, this action calls the workflow and expects a task ID again. And the task ID we should already have in the grid. So there is a column called ID, and you see it says ref ID. And that means that is the token how I can use to access it. So if I just write ID, it will bring me the value of that column. And of course, the next thing that I want to do is maybe refresh the grid. So then we can see the new status. I haven't changed the status actually yet, but I will do it. Okay, so saving. Now I have the start button, and if I click it, probably not happening yet. Okay, I don't have the time tracking yet. So let's see if Radu fixed this. So let's look at the action. Apparently there is a flag here that you can put pipe and O, which brings the right format. And I guess these flags come from the C# datetime format. So I think that there is a list here, how you can format date. So if you only want only the day or the month, you have various options to write after the pipe. And I guess what we used was the O option, which brings us the ISO date. Okay, so let's see if this works. Go back and pass task ID 1. It says successfully completed. So here, if we look at the time again, I still don't see Radu, any entries.
I'm looking right now.
Yeah. 8 hours, date, time.
But then I think you only are creating a time tracking. You are not attaching the time tracking to the.
You are perfectly right. Yeah. So I need to hold to save the task, the tracking time tracking ID. Let's call it. So here I create a new token that exists in this workflow. And yes, you're right. I have to connect it to the existing task. So then what I do in Plant and App for the so I can use this one, add time to task. Yeah, this is one. So here I associate the new tracking that I created with the actual tasks. Task ID, and I use the newly created token time tracking ID. Yeah. Okay, so let's see if this works. So I created a new one, and here refresh. And yes, I have the tracking ID, the tracking here. Okay, so now what we need to do is this start button, we want to change into a stop button whenever it started. There are multiple ways we can do this. I mean, we can look directly to see if there is a time tracking open. A simpler way to do it is do it from the status. So I just update status that maybe it's in progress. So this status is that we created. And then maybe I create another status that says maybe currently not working on this, a long status, but very specific. Okay, so now I can do it from status. So whenever I hit start, I also change the status to in progress. Whenever I hit stop, I change the status to currently not working on this. Okay, so I will probably have to use the ID, so I know that start is 2 and not working is 4. Okay, so now when we hit start, we have to do one more step. Add a new action that says it says to update. So we use the partially update task, so we can only update one of its properties. So we know the task ID, again, same token, and we'll update the status property to 2. Okay. So let's save this and now go back to the task page. So when I click the start button, you notice the status changed to in progress, and then it says 2 time tracking because I just started a new one. So the next thing that I want to do is actually hide the start button and switch it to a stop button if the task is in progress. So in the customize listing, let's go to the button. And here we can do conditional stuff on the button, on the fields. There are many places where we can use the same token syntax to do conditional rendering and logic. So what we are going to do here is verify that the status. Let's confirm that it's actually status name. The reference, so I can actually change by check by status. But since in the data source I also have the status ID, I also have the status, that will be the ID. So I can do it both. I can do it by status ID or by name. I think IDs are safer because they will not change. They will not change as you update the text. The logic will stay the same. So it's safer to use the IDs. Okay, so here in the condition field, we say if status equals 2, not to 4. Actually, if it's different from 2, we show the start button, right? Because it's not in progress, so we can show the start button. Otherwise, we add another button. We call this stop. And here we put the inverse condition. So we say that if status equals 2, then this button will be displayed instead. And notice that the syntax here is it's a C# or JavaScript instance, you know, so C++ standard. So you put double equal to when it evaluates as a Boolean. Okay. So let's reiterate. If its status is not in progress, show the start button. Otherwise, show the stop button. And for now, I don't have the stop workflow. I will just say it like this to test it out that it works. Yeah, so now you see I have the stop button here instead of the start button. And if I create a new task, let's call this cleanup disk for the same customer. You see this one has the start button. So let's create the second workflow, which is to stop time tracking. Okay, well, sorry. So the first thing that we want to do is to update the task status. So we'll put it back to again, I will use task ID and the status I will put to 4, which is not working, not currently working on. Okay. Again, I would have to send the task in. And then the next thing is we'll have to calculate the time. The time from the start date until current time when I click stop, right? So there are multiple ways we can do this. So we need to do a diff between 2 dates. We can do it via SQL, via C#. I'm not sure if we have a token that already does that in the system. So I think I will do it via SQL. So add an action, and we use a SQL action. So here we can do a diff. There are some functions in SQL Server that do this. So I have it here nearby. So it's a date diff function. So then we want to do something like select. So select date diff. This is what we are. What difference are we doing? The difference that we are doing. So here it calculates in minutes. I mean, we could do hours, but then it will probably not round up. So instead, maybe we use another function. It's called sealing. So then we seal this interval, because what it does here. So first it gets the difference as minutes. It divides it by 60 minutes. So then we will arrive with, let's say, 0.5 hours. And then we do the sealing to round that to 1 hour, because that's what we decided. So now I will only have to put in here the start date and the end date. So the start date, we don't already have. I will have to bring it in. The end date will be the current date. And there is a function in SQL. I don't remember it now. Get current date.
I think you are looking for get date.
Get date, yeah. Get date. So this is the current time. We have to bring in the time tracking. So the last time tracking time. So I will save this for now, but it's not. I know it's not ready. So then, to bring in the start date of the last time tracking item, probably what I will have to do is do a manual SQL query against that table. Unless, of course, Radu, do you have another idea?
Can you repeat, please? I was looking for something that may help you in other places.
So what I'm looking in is to bring the last time tracking for a task. So the last entry from the one.
No, I think the SQL query is at least the fastest one.
Okay. So what I want to do here is select, and then maybe what I want is the start date. I think I called it. So actually, let me duplicate this tab so I can look side by side at the data structure. Yeah, so I have the time tracking here, and then the column name is called start time. So I will do something like select start time from, and then the table name. I put spaces, so then I'm not sure if the table name would have spaces as well. Radu?
No, you don't need to put the spaces in the SQL. It's gonna remove them automatically. So the table is without spaces.
Okay. So you say like this is okay.
Yep.
Okay. And here we have two options. We can look by status, so whatever. And actually, time tracking doesn't have status. We can look maybe by duration, where the duration is 0, or we can order them by start date. So we always pick the last.
Yeah.
So then we can do select top 1, order by start date desk, and that should do it.
I think the columns also are without spaces. The column names.
Okay. I will try it without, and if we get an error, I'll put it in.
Okay.
And actually, I should have prepared my SQL connection so I could look directly into the database, but that's a lesson learned for next time. So now I store this result in a start date. And actually now I'm thinking maybe I should build a single query, right? Instead of getting the result here, just to use it in the next SQL action, right? Sorry, I think I got the two actions inversed, so I should put it here. Oh, I deleted the wrong arrow. Okay, so this is the, and we can actually name them so we see them more clearly. So this is the get last start date. And this is the calculate the calculate time. Okay, so now here we can use that token, the start date that we just created. And then we can store
Can I add a mention here?
Sure.
In the SQL query, can you, instead of using get date, you can use get UTC date, because we are working with UTC, so we
Sure.
can calculate the right hour. And also maybe you can consider binding the token there.
Okay.
And also most likely you're gonna have to convert the start date token to a date time, because otherwise the calculation, it may not be able to automatically cast that to a date.
I understand. So then I say start date and cast, or how do you do it? Like this? Radu?
Oh, I muted myself. Daytime offset, I think you are looking for.
Offset?
Offset of 7, of like 7.
Oh, okay, you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay, so let's save this. And then what we can do, so I don't know if I saved the time, so we have it here in, let's call it total hours. So what I can do is just output the total hours for now to see that it worked well. So this workflow is called stop time tracking. So now hit this, press 1, and of course there is some SQL query here. So Radu, maybe you can help me figure out the error while I link the workflow to the button.
Yeah, I can have a look, sure.
Cool, thanks. So now going back to the main screen. So I have the stop button, of course, but it was not linked to the business logic. So what I will do is, again, under the, I'm looking for the stop button. And here I will start adding actions as well. So I want to execute the stop time tracking workflow and passing in the ID again. I don't think I need to save the total hours here. I will not use it for displaying it here in the UI. And we will do a refresh, data source refresh. Okay. So I'm saving this. Okay. So now until Radu gives me the green light on the stopping the workflow, what I will do is maybe we do want to have like a total time here column to see the amount of hours that we spent on a workflow. So then how we do that, there are again multiple ways to do it.
It's working now.
Oh, it's working? Cool.
Yeah, nothing. It was only that you didn't specify the schema of the database when calling the table.
You are right. Yeah. So I think that's an important note to make. So no, let me go back to the stop workflow. So my mistake here was that I didn't add this app schema here. So all the tables that PlanetApp generates puts in a separate schema. It's called app. Without it, the default schema is DBO, where the table didn't exist. Thanks, Radu. Okay, so now if we click stop on this one, the status changed. If we go to look at the time tracking, it still says 0 hours. He should have done it should have done a 1 hour because we are doing sealing. Okay, so we definitely have a problem in our logic, in our business logic. If you can look at that as well, Radu, that would work beautifully for me, at least.
You're not updating, basically not updating anything.
You are definitely right. Yeah. So I didn't finish this workflow. I was just getting the total hours. So the next step, yeah, we have to do something with these total hours. So then we have to update the time tracking, but I don't have its ID in this context because I only passed the task. Since I already have this query that selects the start time, I would also use it to select the ID. And then instead of saving a single result, I would have to switch to storing the, let's call this a time tracking ID, and also storing the start date, right? So now instead of storing one result, my query returns two results, two columns, and I would store them each in its own token. So this one I already used, and this one I need to save for myself, because what I'm going to do here is do another partial update, the time tracking. So I will update the time tracking ID, and I will update the hours property with the total hours, I believe was the name. Okay. So this one should actually go after, and I should delete the right arrow this time, I hope. Yeah. Oh, no, it was still the wrong arrow. Okay. And let me check that the name is correct. So it's total hours, yep. Okay, so let's save this and go back to the front end, and let's go back to the task and do it again. So I hit, let's use this other task. I hit start, it's in progress, some time passes, I'm doing all the hard work here. And then I click stop and, okay, it was called start time, not start date. That's why you should always test your code. Okay, so the problem is here with this parameter that is called start time, not start date. And let me see how I use it here. Calculate time. It's using it's using start date here. Okay, let me use the same name everywhere. That will make it much easier to manage. Start time, start time, start time, and here it's start time, and it stores it at start time. Okay, so now I'm using the same name everywhere, so I avoid confusions. Okay, so let's do it again. Start, in progress, stop, currently not working on this. Let's look at the time tracking. And now it still says 0. Yeah. So it still says 0. Radu, if you can help me with this.
Yeah, I'm looking on it.
I don't know what I did wrong here. Part of software development. Time tracking ID. This is the ID, time tracking ID. Okay. So until Radu helps me with that, the next thing that we want to do, we want to show like the total amount of time that we spent on this. And I was starting to tell you that there are multiple ways to do this. One would be again to do it through a SQL query to change the data source and do a direct query against the task and the time tracking tables. But that will will make me do everything manually from now on using this table. So instead of having the task data source that is automated, I will use the SQL, so I'll have to glue everything together. So maybe instead of going that route, what I will do instead is create a token. So I can create tokens from SQL query, and then I can add a computed field that uses that token. Am I right in assuming this, Radu?
Sorry, I was looking in the other
Sure,
thing.
no worries. I will try it and you can tell me afterwards.
Okay.
Okay. So what we do here in the token screen, we have the ability to create new tokens. We'll have to create a namespace first. So let's say, let's call it task, the namespace. And then we'll create a token in this namespace, new token. And we call this get total hours. And here in the definition, we can do like a database query in this case. So I can do select all from app that, let me copy paste it so I don't do it wrong again. Yeah, so I will go here in the workflows in a separate window. And this is the table. Let me copy it with the schema. Okay, so here I'm doing select all from app time tracking. And actually I will do a select sum of, and then I need the column name. And the column name is called, let me go to the entity screen, to the time tracking. The column is called hours. Yeah. So select some hours from time tracking where, and then task ID equals okay, so I don't think this will work because there is an intermediary table. Right, Radu?
So time tracking task. Yeah, it's an intermediate one.
Okay.
Yeah.
A relationship table through where I need to join and do that. So for now, maybe let's just sum all tasks because there is not much time from this webinar. And I want to get it to a point where we at least have this. Okay, so now we can save and test this token that it works. So get total hours is still 0. Did you manage to figure out the issue, Radu?
Not yet. I'm debugging.
Good. So then what I will do instead is maybe I will create a manual time tracking. So then we do have some hours there. So here in time, here in time, I can add the task, yeah, clean up disk, and then hours. Let's put 4. Time, it doesn't really matter because it's already calculated in 4. Okay, so now what we'll do in the grid, we want to show the total. Customize listing. So I will add a computed field, and then I will use the token that I just created, get the total hours. And optionally, I can pass in parameters. So I would need to pass in the task ID, which I don't use for now, but I will need it later. No? So I can pass in task ID like this, where ID is the ID column from here, and then this is the token that I created. So let's see if that works as expected. Yeah, so of course they will all show that they have 4 hours. So let me go back to the tokens and try to do that anyway, where task ID equals just to do something. Okay, so the task ID column doesn't, yeah, it's a relationship table. Okay, so what we have so far is it's a simple task management application. I can do start stop on tasks. I can drill down to see all the times when people worked on that task, when they started working, and how much they worked on each. If it worked well, I would have been able to see that. And then the next step in our application actually have been to go in the customers and build a bill function, a bill button here that takes all the hours for all the tasks that the customer has, sum them up, and produce a PDF invoice. We will not get through that today, but I will be happy to maybe continue this demo next week to add a bit more features, while maybe we also cover something new next week. Because we have a little bit of time left, and I'd be happy to trigger a discussion, see if there are any questions that I can answer. People asking about recording. Yes, we'll have recordings. Do you, Collis ask us if there is a brief overview of the SQL table structure for entities. There will be, so it's actually going to be in the next release here where you see the entities in the entity screen in the, let me go back, in this list view. We'll also have a detailed view where we also show what are the tables behind that and even provide some sample queries that you can copy paste to start from. Because yeah, I know if you don't have a SQL connection, which you could have, by the way, have a SQL Management Studio connected to the database through a VPN. So you could have direct access as well. But let's say if you don't have it, it's hard to figure out what are the table names. Another question about white box options. I'm not sure I understand what white box means. And actually, if I don't know if I can do it from here. Oh, removing plant and app logos and stuff. Of course, I mean, the logos can be changed from here easily. That's just the default that we start with. So of course, it can be changed. We used to have a free plan. I'm not sure if we'll do it again. The free plan will probably have our branding, but the paid plans definitely not. Yeah. Chuck asked us about the errors. So we've seen a couple of errors, and I think errors are part of the developer experience. You need to have good errors. You are right, they were not completely visible, so we need to make that area scrollable. But all the errors are also available in the admin logs here. So here you could see some errors. I don't know which one we got. These are from tokens, so probably when I did the tests. Let's scroll a bit down. Yeah, so this is, for example, is when I put the task ID column, which was not valid. It gave me this error. I also seen it in the workflow, but it's also here, and it's also in the log files in a more detailed format. It's in log files on disk. Cool. We got another question regarding localization for naming conventions for menu items. So this is localization. We don't support it yet out of the box, but it can be achieved through configuration. For example, what we did in the past was building a database table of localization of text, and then create a token that gets localization from that table. So to the token, we pass the language, code, and then a key, the key of the string that we wanted. And then and then you can use that token wherever you need to make it localizable. And also there are settings. So Plantain app is based on DNN, the underlying architecture. So then DNN has the multi-language capacity, so you can localize stuff like menus, pages. But then in terms of maybe the forms that you see or the data, that right now has to be like custom implementation through custom tables and tokens. Yeah. Another question is when it comes to SQL and the SaaS model, can we use our own SQL server? Azure SQL Server. Okay, so our hosted infrastructure is on AWS. Of course, you can use external databases. So I'm not sure if you saw, but most actions in our environment. So let's look at the SQL actions. So wherever there is a SQL action, there's also a connection string. So you can connect to external databases. Of course, if it lives in a different data center, it might be slower. We've seen our customers do it, or they synchronize the external database locally. So they created, we have a feature here called automation. So they created like a scheduled job that runs once a day to synchronize, to bring data from the other database locally. So we've seen customers do it like this. We've seen customers querying external database real time, but that slows down the process, of course, the user experience. And we've seen, of course, customers building API to get that data. So it's various solutions. And of course, Plantain app also supports on-premise model. So you could have an on-premise instance, which in your case could mean have it deployed on an Azure VM or app. So then it's in the same network and it can access the SQL Server, the Azure SQL Server instantly. Another question is about licensing. What would the licensing be to build and use such an app? If there was customer-facing portion, what license would customer need to use such an app? So right now we have two licensing models, one that we use for partners and one that we use for end customers. Because partners usually they build multiple apps for their customers, and some of these partners don't want to burden their customers with additional licensing fees, so they absorb this licensing. And the partner pricing is per developer. It starts at $200 per month per developer. And then there are various plans, and I can actually share with you. It's not the final format, but this is something that we will release, I think, by next week. So there will be per developer pricing that starts at $200. There are various tiers depending on features, but also on the support included. And then customers usually go per app. This is something we are thinking to do now. Basically, this is our base plan that most of our customers start with at 6,000 per year. And then we have a different plan, the next plan that is more for high load customers and development teams. And in between this, usually it's a negotiation to get more capacity or more support or more developer support. And this, like I said, this pricing will go public next week. It will probably still suffer a few minor changes here and there. Okay. Another question from Prashant. Does this eliminate the need for individual subscriptions for modules? So we used to sell part of this technology for people that are not aware as modules inside the DNN ecosystem. In the meanwhile, we build this product that is a single product, a platform. And yes, this product has a subscription that covers everything. You don't need to go component by component if you upgrade from DNN Shard to Plantain app. Okay, so it was a very good meeting, even if we had trouble. I couldn't get everything that I proposed delivered. But you get the idea of what can be built in 1 hour. You can imagine what can be built in 8 hours, in 1 week. Most of the MVPs that we do, it's usually between 3 days to 2 weeks, where we can deliver, for example, an application like this with maybe more features, not just this, but you can see the speed of development. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. I await your feedback. You'll receive a link to a simple form to provide us with feedback. That would be wonderful to have. And I guess I will be seeing you next week. So thanks so much for attending.